The future perfect tense in English is a verb tense used for actions that will be completed between now and some other point in the future. The purpose of this tense is to indicate that something will be finished by a specific time, emphasizing the completion of an action before another future action. Essentially, this tense highlights that an action will be completed while also using specific time expressions. In the subject-verb agreement, we'll have a subject, the auxiliary verb will, the verb have, and then the main verb in the past participle form. This pattern will remain the same no matter what the subject is. A subject plus will have plus a past participle. To make matters simple, I'll use previous verbs that I had in the previous videos. Let's use the verb to talk in the future perfect. To put the verb in the tense, we begin with the subject, put will have for all subjects, and then use the past participle of to talk. I will have talked. You will have talked. He, she, it will have talked. We will have talked. They will have talked. This is how the main verb functions in the future perfect, and everything is the same, so it's not too hard to remember. Plus, it's meaningless to cover all subjects because everything is the same, so I will only emphasize the pronunciation. Let's not forget that subject contractions can also be made. I'll have talked. You'll have talked. Will have talked, and so on. A different verb with an irregular past participle is to eat. The structure is a subject, will have, and then the past participle, which is eaten. Will have eaten. Will have eaten. It's also possible to use contractions. A different verb is to make. The pattern is a subject, will have, and then the past participle. Will have made. Will have made. Contractions can also be made. A different verb is to speak. The pattern is a subject, will have, and then the past participle. Will have spoken. Will have spoken. As always, contractions can be made. This is the function of the future perfect tense, but it's also significant to understand how it ties in with the future simple. Sometimes we can use the future perfect and future simple interchangeably, so there is no difference in meaning because time expressions make the sequence of events clear. Take a look at these sentences. She will leave before you get there. She will have left before you get there. In this case, there is no difference in meaning because the time expression before signifies the sequence of events and that the action she does will be completed either way, before you get there. But a sentence without a time expression will not have a clear sequence of events, and in that case, we need the future perfect to show what happened first. She will leave at 8 o'clock means that she will wait until 8 o'clock to leave. But she will have left at 8 o'clock means that she will leave before 8 o'clock. That's the function of the future perfect. It's also important to understand when to not use the future perfect. The future perfect is only used for actions that will be completed before a specific point in the future. So the action we're talking about must have a deadline. If we don't have it, we use the future simple instead, such as she will leave and she will have left. The deadline can be very specific, vague, or depend on when something else happens. Still, it has to be sometime in the future. To use the future perfect with negation, we add a negative word like not after will but before have. A subject plus will plus a negative plus have plus a past participle. Some examples are: we will not have eaten breakfast before we get to the airport tomorrow morning. They will not have finished their work before the show. By using the time expression before, we can specify the sequence of events, and therefore we use the future perfect. In this case, subject contractions will be too awkward, so it's better to use the negative contraction won't. We won't have eaten, and they won't have finished. When asking a question in the future perfect, the auxiliary verb will comes first, followed by the subject, then have, and then the past participle. Will plus a subject plus have plus a past participle. An example of that is, will you have eaten lunch already when we arrive? The response can be affirmative with a subject contraction or negative with a negative contraction. It's also worth mentioning that the future perfect is used with time expressions that generally act as prepositional phrases. By having time expressions that make the sequence of events clear, like by the time, from now, at, already, when, before, as soon as, and more, we can understand the full meaning of the future perfect tense. Here are some examples with time expressions. By this time next week, she will have left for her trip. 3 days from now, we will have finished our project. At midnight, the party will have ended. When I travel to France, I will have visited 10 countries. Before the party, I will have cleaned the bathroom. As soon as someone buys this chair, I will have sold all the furniture. It's possible to rewrite all of these to emphasize the word order, and contractions can also be made. This is how the future perfect works, and with more practice, here are common regular and irregular verbs in the tense, with negation and questions. Finally, the future perfect can also be continuous, and this tense describes actions that will continue up until a specific point in the future. When we describe an action in the future perfect continuous, we are putting ourselves forward in time and looking back at the duration of the action. The action will have begun sometime in the past, present, or future, but it is expected to be continued in the future. The pattern of this tense uses will have, the past participle of to be, which is been, and a present participle, which is an infinitive with ing. A subject plus will have been plus a present participle. Some examples with time expressions are, in November, I will have been working at the company for 5 years. At 5 o'clock, I will have been waiting a long time. When I turn 40, I will have been playing the piano for 20 years. At last, it's important to understand when to not use the future perfect continuous. This tense is not used with non-action verbs like to be, to seem, and to know, so instead, they take the future perfect tense. Basically, it is incorrect to say, on Thursday, I will have been knowing you for a week. In this case, the future perfect should be used because the verb to know meaningfully cannot be continuous. It's better to say, on Thursday, I will have known you for a week. Another example is, I will have been reading 10 books by Christmas. This phrase is also wrong because the main verb doesn't fit, so it's better to use the future perfect. I will have read 10 books by Christmas. Fundamentally, to tell when to use the future perfect continuous and when not, it all depends on the main verbs. But generally, this tense is extremely rare, not only in English conversations, but also in writing. I would advise knowing it, but not using it at all. It's better to understand its purpose, but using it is really difficult and not that practical, even at the highest level of English. Nonetheless, this is how the future perfect fully works in English.